SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to Module 4, Session 1, Exploring Gestalt's Principles. Let's dive in. So previously, we have talked about principles of design, and we have also looked into various types of principles of design like balance, emphasis, variety, contrast, repetition, and rhythm. So we also try to understand like how balance plays an important role in terms of symmetrical and asymmetrical, and how weight distributions happens in a composition. In emphasis, we have tried to learn how emphasizing some elements create hierarchy or contrast in the overall composition. Apart from that, variety also helps to include or showcase unity or uniformity in a composition, which also creates a dynamic representation in the overall composition. So in contrast, we have also looked into how colors plays an important role in creating contrast, shapes and sizes too plays an important in creating contrast in a composition, and with contrast how the idea of legibility, composition, hierarchy plays into a better representation. And in the recent session, we talked about repetition and rhythm, and how repetition plays an important role in creating uniformity or creating relationship in a composition, right? And apart from that, rhythm, how it helps the flow of the composition to be navigated through the concept of rhythm. So, in this session, we'll try to understand what is Gestalt's principles and how it impacts in design, right? Apart from that, we also will include the session of figure and ground, and we'll try to understand how foreground and background plays an important role in understanding or perceiving an idea in a particular visual communication. In session 2, we'll try to understand closure, right? How things which are close to each other creates a way of completeness, even though the representation might not be portrayed directly. Some way or the other, our brain will try to create correlation with the existing nearby forms or elements associated to it. In session 3, we will also seek for similarity as a Gestalt's principles, where we'll try to identify or create relationship in a similar way, maybe in terms of shape, size, or color as a part in and how it creates a better way of impactful communication. In session 4, we'll talk about continuity. So, how the way of representing things or repetition or the elements associated which are similar in nature creates a better uniform way of representation or navigation to a particular composition. So finally, by session 5, we'll conclude it with the idea of proximity, how nearby or close by elements or objects creates segmentations or creates a layout which has a better correlation with each other. And apart from that, pregnance, we'll try to understand how our brain effectively ignores the details of multiple elements if they are associated to each other, and it tries to perceive as a unified whole, irrespective of whatever elements are associated to it. Your brain will try to create as a whole, meaning as a whole. Okay. So with this, we'll start with the idea of what is Gestalt's principles, right? And we'll take a few examples to understand it in a much better way. Yes. So you can see an image here, right? What do you see here? In the right side, right? There's an image here, and I'm pretty sure your brain has already tried to process it, and somewhere the other it has also tried to understand what is the image about, but it's going beyond that. It's trying to create a life in this particular image or a correlation with the past experience, and it's creating a, I would say it's creating an impression of something which is lifelike, and we'll see about that in the upcoming discussions. I'm pretty sure some of you or most of you might feel like it looks like a toad or a frog with a cigar in its mouth, right? Although the elements, actual elements, the raw elements are totally different, right? You can see a toilet seat cover, two tissue rolls, and a inner side of the tissue roll, right? Which is placed between the seat cover, right? And again, this is another way how things create a quick meaning, right? Even though the actual representation is totally different, but since you have a past experience about the idea of frogs or toads, some way or the other, it tries to create a lifelike representation of it. So yes, probably you might have visualized similar to this image, not exactly, but probably might be closer representation to this, with a toad or a frog with a cigar in its mouth, right? So what actually happens? Let's try to understand, right? So initially, when you see the anatomy of this image, right, the tissue roll also has a closer depiction to this toad or a frog image. So your eyes, your brain has easily visualized or created a meaning out of those tissue roll as eyes, and the segment of where the toilet seat is used is also taken as a smiley representation of a toad or a frog, right? So your brain has quickly applied the Gestalt's principles, especially the similarity and closure, to simplify and organize the complex information into a familiar mental image. Again, familiar mental image is the part where it talks about your past experience. So suppose if you have no experience about the, or if you have no exposure how a toad or a frog looks, definitely this representation may lead to another representation which is totally different based on your past experience. Okay, so this kind of experience comes when you are totally quite familiar with with the previous information, and your brain is quickly trying to create an image out of it, and it tries to give a meaning out of it. So when you see this image, your mind intuitively grouped element, that is the tissue roll as an eye, right? The lid as a mouth of the toad or frog, right? And inside roll as a cigar. So into a coherent whole, forming a vivid and unified image. So basically, your brain quickly created a unified image out of this. Although all the segments, all the raw materials are different, right, made from different elements, but when the overall composition is being perceived, it took as a overall representation. So this illustrates how the mind seeks to reduce complexity and establish a meaningful relationship between disparate elements, creating a vivid and relatable picture. Okay, so this is another part which is very important to understand Gestalt's principles. So basically, it talks about how we perceive and how quickly we create meaningful composition, although there can be complex representation of that. So let's do another exercise. So what do you see? The image on the right, right? These are leaves, right? You can see two leaves, right? So you are looking at as two dried leaves, right? Now, how about now? So when I zoomed in, now I'm pretty sure your brain can see, your eyes can see some of the details, right? Which is again changing the narrative now. So initially, when we have seen this in a smaller segment, right, your brain has already processed it as two dried leaves, right? But suddenly, when you see the details of this image, right, now there is a difference in the perception. Okay, so what's happening here now, right? So these are two oak leaf butterflies. So as you can see, the antenna here, right, of the butterfly, the legs here, and the overall wings of the butterfly on a slice of pineapple, by the way. So again, while you was looking at this image, your brain was totally ignoring the existence of this pineapple. Okay, and suddenly when I say the word pineapple, your brain was looking, it was seeking for that information, and finally it has got, and it created the image, although it was not visible in the initial part. But the moment I have told the word pineapple, your brain has created the image out of it, and now you can correlate with the slice of pineapple, right? So this is how quickly your brain also creates or try to create meaning out of it, and it validates that. Okay, so we'll see how what actually happened, right? So initially your brain perceived it as a dried leaves, right, two dried leaves, and moment we zoomed in, right, and then you can sense the anatomy of butterfly. Now your brain is again associating the overall leaves to another segment, which is an insect, right? And the principle refers to the ability to distinguish a figure, that's the object, from its background. So moment I zoomed in, it tried to figure out the image out of it, and when it was figuring out, it can sense the anatomy of the butterfly. And in this case, the oak leaf butterflies might resemble like leaf blending with the surroundings, right? So it was initially blending with the surrounding, but the moment the details can be observed, automatically you can see the overall anatomy of the butterfly. So however your mind identify them as a distinct features, like butterflies, right, against the ground, that is the background environment, this perception relies on the brain's ability to prioritize the butterfly as the main object of focus. And that's how we process any kind of information visually, right? So we tend to create meaning out of it, and with those meaning we'll try to see whether we can create relationship, and based on that our brain will give us information about that. So coming to the idea of what is Gestalt's principles. So Gestalt's principles are based on observation that humans naturally organize sensory information into patterns and structures, right? So again, simplifying complex stimuli into more understandable form. Okay, so this is again important in how we try to organize sensory information into patterns and structure, and again simplifying complex stimuli into more understandable forms. Okay, and this approach contrasts with the traditional psychology, which focus on breaking down perception into individual elements. Okay, so with this we will also try to see like what does it actually mean. So the principle explains how we human group visual elements and how we perceive relationship between object and the environment. Again, how we are processing the information which are present in front of us, right, and how we are correlating with that and creating meaning out of it is the another part. So if you say what is Gestalt and where does the term come from, right? It comes from German, and what it means is like shape or form, and it's the central idea of Gestalt's psychology, that the human mind tends to perceive object as a unified whole rather than as separate individual component. That's what we are trying to say. That's what we have experienced based on our small example which we have tried So one with the toad wala, so where the overall image has different segments, right? Although your brain has perceived and created a character out of it, which was not. So if you see the image, it's mostly it's a man-made elements, but again, your brain has quickly created meaning and tried to create a live or lifelike representation out of it, right? Similarly, this is what like you as a designer have to also understand, like how quickly we try to create meaning. And this was also explored by three German psychologists, which name were are Max, Wolfgang, and Kurt. So they worked on this concept and they have created the principles of Gestalt, and today we are learning about that in terms of design. Okay. So, the identified set of laws which address the natural compulsion to find the order in disorder. So basically, what they have identified is how we are good in creating order, right? Although the composition or the elements or the environment may be disorder in that way, but still our brain will try to create meaning out of it such that it makes sense to us. So according to this, the mind informs what the eye sees by perceiving a series of individual elements as a whole. So this is what we were talking about, right? So even if you see this image, right, there are different ways how you can perceive this. Although your brain is taking the overall composition as a whole and trying to understand what are the details associated with it, right? So in this session, we will now shift our discussion towards figure and ground, and the rest of the principles we'll cover in the upcoming sessions. Okay. So let's start with the principles of figure or ground. Okay. So when you see this image, right, you can definitely see within this border, right, there is one foreground and there is one background. The foreground is the white circle and the background is the black square. And this is how most of the compositions, especially visual compositions, works, right? And primarily you have to deal with always foreground and background, and based on that, you as a designer, you as an artist can take a call how the background is playing an important role in your composition, or how foreground is playing an important role, or it can be in both, how foreground and background are complementing each other and creating a better or impactful communication. Now let's take an example which will make us understand the concept of figure and ground in a different way. So as you can see this image here, right, and by now you have already identified some of the shapes associated to this image. So you might have seen some geometrical shapes overlapping with each other, right, when you see this image. And by now your brain has already processed what are the geometrical shapes associated to this image. So let's identify that one by one. So yes, if you're thinking about circle, yes, the circle was there. Then a triangle, right, and a pentagon, which is irregular in shape, right, and a star. So although these shapes were not visible in the initial phase of the display, right, when we have seen this, but our brain has already processed this and gave us meaningful information, and that's what the principle of Gestalt's principles talks about. Basically, even though there is a complexity, our brain can easily create meaning associated to that. Now, there's another question which is coming, is which shape is in the base layer and which shape seems to be on the top layer, right? So I'm pretty sure now you have identified which can be in the base layer and in the top layer. Let's see this. So some of you have maybe identified saying, okay, the triangle seems to be bigger, so it can be in the base layer, right? And this the star, which seems to be a little bit smaller compared to the rest of the elements, it can be in the top layer, which is not wrong. So in general, when our brain perceives an image, it tends to interpret the larger area as a ground, that is the background, and the smaller area as the figure. Although in the original set, right, when I have extracted, the triangle is not from the base layer. In fact, it is the circle, or maybe the irregular pentagon was in the base layer. But since the triangle is bigger in shape, our brain has already perceived that to be in the background. And since the star seems to be smaller in size, right, your brain automatically tend to keep this in the top layer. So in this case, because of this, our mind seeks for efficiency and simplicity in processing visual information, and it assigns prominence to smaller, distinct areas, whereas relegating the larger, more uniform areas in the background. So let's take another example of figure and ground from the graphic design perspective. So as you can see a poster here, which is commissioned by IBM, right? And this was designed by Nomabar. So most of you might not know who is Nomabar. So Nomabar was is presently also a renowned graphic designer and illustrator, celebrated for his ingenious use of negative space to create visually striking and conceptually rich design. His works has been appeared in prestigious publications like the New Yorker, the Time Magazine, and the Economist, and also he does multiple commission works. Apart from that, he is also renowned for using minimal designs, right, in any kind of compositions. And also his often design includes themes about politics, identity design, culture, using bold shapes, flat colors that convey layers of messages. So now if you can see this image here, you can easily see how IBM is trying to talk about their technology, especially in the banking sector, right? It says banks now hold up robbers. So it was talking about the IBM technology and how, because of such kind of technology, it's easier for the banks to identify fraudulent activity happening in the system. And here the overall composition is beautifully composed, playing with both foreground and background concept. So here you can easily see there is a larger and a stronger hand trying to hold out some of the a character which seems to be very much like thief kind of representation, right? And it's trying to identify those fraudulent activity, and it's picking up those things and trying to hold them, right? So this is a very beautiful way of representing the both in a very beautiful balanced way, like how the concept of the foreground and background, again using repetitive colors, choice of typeface, has been used to create a visually balanced representation. We'll look into another poster, which you can see it here, and this is again a very interesting composition, how both the background and foreground are complementing each other to create a better image, or to project the story in a much better way. So what does it say? It says police seize emergencies before they emerge. That's a very interesting line, right? And this is again showcase how IBM technology can help the police to detect or identify any kind of emergencies or any kind of important or crime activities before it becomes or accelerates to a larger context, right? So this again shows, if you see the composition, the concept of the cap again signifies it's associated to the security, right? Again, you can see a robotic arm with a camera depicting the eye of the police, right? Again, this is very much abstract in nature, but again, it's very much symbolical, like how the eyes of the police can be advanced or layered up in a much better way using IBM technology. Okay, so this is how the use of foreground and background creates a very interesting composition, and it also complements the overall narrative which the IBM is trying to project. Yes, so this is again a very interesting composition done by Shigo Fukuda, who was a very renowned Japanese graphic designer, and he is also known for his optical illusion and negative space works. And primarily, if you see this image, right, it's a very beautiful illusion and a contrast between dark and light colors, and you can easily see how there is a dual perception. So the image plays on the Gestalt's principles of figure and ground, where the same visual element serves as a dual purpose, depending on the viewer's perception. So when you see the male portion, right, when you see the leg portion of male, automatically that portion becomes the foreground, and the white portion becomes the background. But if you follow the female portion, right, when you see the female leg, then again the female leg act as a foreground and the black becomes the background. So that's why the word dual perception has been talked about. This is how the concept of illusion again makes sense to the overall composition, which creates better engagement in terms of understanding the overall composition, and it also engages viewers by challenging them to perceive the duality hidden in the image. Apart from that, again, it's very much symbolic in nature, like how male and female figures are very much abstract. Only one portion of their anatomy has been shown, just to create a thought-provoking commentary in the overall composition. So the poster is an excellent example of how Fukuda could communicate complex ideas with visual clarity, challenging traditional perspective in graphic design. So if some of you haven't known about him, right, I would request to go and search about him, see his work, and he always appreciate the concept of visual communication. In fact, he says the idea of visual communication should be addressed in a very fun way, rather than being in a very serious way, right? And that's why there is a sense of humor, there is a sense of wittiness in his composition, and a sense of playfulness in his composition. Yes, so this is another iconic poster designed by Shigo Fukuda, and this poster was named as Victor in 1945. And I'm pretty sure if people know about him, knows about this iconic poster, where the poster depicts the overall composition in a very symbolic way. The image depicts a bullet which is not leaving. In fact, it's returning back to the gun barrel, and also how it's focusing on the anti-war representation. Okay, and this is a very cleverly transformed as a symbolic representation of war, and how peace can be seeked into for better and a peaceful future. Apart from that, the overall poster is very much minimal in nature, and how foreground and background are able to address in a right manner, in a bright manner, right? And this kind of work is very much showcase how Fukuda's ability to merge art and activism together, delivering a profound message with elegance and visual clarity. Okay, so if you are trying to create any kind of composition where the thought is projected in a very clear way, that such kind of composition always brings clarity to the overall information which you are trying to project. So my recommendation is that if you're trying to create any kind of visual information for your audience, try to keep it simple, less try to put less chaotic information, use less elements such that it creates a better and a striking information which makes sense for the users in a very easy way rather than getting confused. So let's take another example from a different segment, that is the idea of logo and how figure and ground can be observed in a logo design. So this is a logo of FedEx. I am pretty sure some of you or most of you definitely know about FedEx, which is a logistic company, right, which delivers different parcels all over the world, right? And if you can see their logo, there's a very interesting segment in the logo where the overall foreground and background comes together to create a different meaning. So here, if you can see, if you where I have highlighted the arrow here, so it's between the E and X, right? There is an arrow projected towards that, and according to them, this is what they want to highlight as a brand, like moving forward, like it's a directional way of representing the overall brand. And this is a very interesting or a hidden fact which you can observe in the overall logo, where the concept of figure and ground can be easily identified in this overall compositions. Again, this is another example of NBC logo. Again, if you see the logo, it is also an abstract representation of a peacock, and you can see colorful feathers behind it, and within the feathers there's a small nudge where again it shows the anatomy of abstract anatomy of a peacock. Again, it show in that way how the overall representation again plays with the concept of figure and ground in a very playful and engaging manner. Yeah, so this is again a beautiful picture clicked by Franco Gracia, and you can see how the picture again plays along with the idea of the foreground background in a illusionary manner, because although the walls are not designed in such a way, but because of the shadows it feels like a pillar, right? It feels like a monolith, multiple monoliths standing together. And now with this composition again you can see easily how the idea of the figure and ground changes based on the shadow which is being projected in this composition. Okay. Yeah. So again, coming to the representation of the website, especially in this banner, right? This is the landing page. Here again, how do you see the concept of figure and ground playing around, right? So here, if you see the text here, right? So it has been purposely highlighted to get attention, right? Such that people know the registration is open for the lecture series. And because of this contrast, right, somewhere the other, although the green seems to be the background, right, but for this segment now the blue seems to be the background, right, and this creates a unique contrast in the overall composition and also hierarchy. So your eyes tend to focus here primarily then gradually it goes to the rest of the information, right? And this is how your users might also perceive based on how you change the figure and ground while you are trying to address any kind of information which you feel should be addressed in a primary or in a initial part of the display. Okay. So with this, we have came to the end of this session of understanding figure and ground as a principle in Gestalt's psychology. So we'll just do a recap about what we have learned, right? So typically Gestalt's psychology, where we have talked about different principles, right? And primarily we have covered figure and ground in this session, where we have tried to understand how foreground and background plays an important role in conveying different meanings, right? And based on the context, how both figure and ground can also complement each other to create engaging and very playful compositions. So it explains how we perceive and differentiate a visual scene by identifying a focal animal, that is the figure, and its surrounding content, that is the ground. So this relationship is essential for creating clear, organized design, as it helps direct attention and establish visual hierarchy. Effective use of figure and ground enhances communication, engages viewers, and can even create clever optical illusion, making it a very powerful tool both for art and design. So thank you for your time. I hope you all have got some idea about the Gestalt's principles along with the figure and ground, right? And how it has impacted the world around us, and how we can perceive or understand those compositions in a much better way for better and effective communication. We'll end this session here, and in our next session we'll learn about closure in Gestalt's principles. Goodbye and have a nice day.